The number one seed going into the season ended up going to the Georgia Bulldogs. The Bulldogs had a solid, albeit disappointing year last year, and are vying for the national championship this year. They'll face their first big challenge in Week 5 when they'll march into Tuscaloosa to play the Alabama Crimson Tide in a rematch of last year's SEC championship game, which they lost 27-24. This game is a toss-up, and I think it will determine which one of these teams will get higher seeding in the playoffs. Their next big challenge in Week 8 they will play the Texas Longhorns. This will be the Longhorns' first time playing Georgia as a conference opponent as they join the SEC just this year. This game will be held in Austin and also has very high seeding implications. These two teams match up very nicely as they both have great quarterback play and a strong defense to back up a potent offense. Georgia will have another tough conference matchup when they will go into Oxford to play the Ole Miss Rebels. This game will be a tale of two stories. Georgia, the big powerhouse, who has won what seems like everything in these past few years, and the Ole Miss Rebels, who have been an up-and-coming team in the last couple of seasons and are really starting to gain some respect from the committee. I'll definitely be tuned in for this one. There are three guys that I wanted to highlight on this team. First off is quarterback Carson Beck, who is ranked as the seventh best player in college football by ESPN. I think that Beck is the best quarterback in the nation at the moment. In 2023, he had a great first year as a starter, and he will look to build up his resume as he prepares for the draft. Next up is their star safety, Malachi Starks. He's the best safety in college football according to ESPN, and I would tend to agree. Starks was a defensive standout last year, making 31 tackles, 3 interceptions, and having 7 pass deflections. Starks will lead this Bulldog secondary to a top 10 unit in the nation by the end of the year. Finally, offensive lineman Tate Ratledge. Ratledge is one of the best linemen in the nation. Hardly anybody could get by this big man. Sitting at 6'6", 311 pounds, he'll be a force to be reckoned with on this Georgia O-line. The Bulldogs went 12-1 last year, and their only loss was in the SEC championship game to Alabama. They demolished an injured Florida State team 63-3 in the Orange Bowl to end the year. This year, expectations are very high, but they have one of the toughest schedules of anybody, and all three of their biggest games are on the road. This season should be a fun one for these Georgia Bulldogs. The second best team in college football is the Ohio State Buckeyes. The Buckeyes are eyeing a Big Ten championship and are looking for their first national championship in the Ryan Day era. Their first big challenge will come in Week 7, where they'll have to go to Oregon to play the Ducks. This is a huge game with Big Ten implications. This will be the first time these two play since the Ducks waddled into Columbus and beat the Buckeyes in 2021. The Buckeyes have another big challenge in Week 10, when they will go to Happy Valley to play Penn State. The Buckeyes have fared pretty well against the Nittany Lions in recent memory, but this year Penn State is looking very strong, and they'll have one of the strongest home field advantages in college football. And then, the big one, rivalry weekend, Ohio State versus Michigan. This is the biggest game by far for Ohio State this year. They have lost all 3 of their past contests against Michigan, but the Wolverines lost a bunch of big pieces, including longtime head coach Jim Harbaugh. Their 3 big players start with safety Caleb Downs. The sophomore transferred this year to the Buckeyes from Alabama. He should be a lockdown player in what should come to be one of the better secondaries. Next is wide receiver Emeka Egbuka. Egbuka had a solid year last year, but should flourish without having to compete with Marvin Harrison Jr. for targets. Finally is defensive end Jack Sawyer. Sawyer was a beast last year, and I expect him to have at least 10 sacks this year, as he looks to be a first-round pick in this year's draft. Last year, Ohio State won 11-1 in the regular season. However, they lost to Michigan in the final game of the year. They also lost the Cotton Bowl 14-3 to Missouri. Ohio State is looking to bounce back, and if they can beat Michigan, I don't see many teams stopping them. The third best team in college football is the Oregon Ducks. The Ducks are entering their first season of Big Ten play after they left the Pac-12. The Ducks will look to impress the conference this year, and they look like one of the best teams in the nation. Their first big challenge comes in Week 7 against Ohio State. We've already covered this matchup, but I will say that Oregon needs to play well in this game if they want to come off as a new powerhouse in the Big Ten. Their next big matchup is in Week 10, when they'll go to the Big House to play Michigan. The Wolverines, as we've discussed, are weaker, but they still shouldn't be forgotten, especially when they're playing at home. Finally, in Week 14, Oregon will go back home to play Washington University. The Cougars left the Pac-12 for the Big Ten just like Oregon did, and this should be a great game for both of these teams in a rematch of last year's Pac-12 championship. The Ducks have a star quarterback this year after losing Bo Nix in the draft. Dylan Gabriel transferred from Oklahoma, where he impressed many, throwing for nearly 4,000 yards with 30 touchdowns. Next is wide receiver Tez Johnson, who's one of the fastest players in college football. Johnson should be Gabriel's number one target in this potent Oregon offense. Finally, is cornerback Jabbar Muhammad. Muhammad was a standout corner last year with 3 interceptions and 14 pass deflections. He'll be looking for a great year on this Oregon secondary. Last year, the Ducks went 11-2. However, they lost the Pac-12 championship game to Washington. They bounced back at the Fiesta Bowl though and won 45-6 against Liberty. They'll be looking for a great year this year to impress the Big Ten Conference. The fourth best team in college football is the Texas Longhorns. The Longhorns are starting in a new conference in the SEC after leaving the Big 12 last year. Texas will have their first big challenge of the year in Week 2 against the Michigan Wolverines. Texas will travel up to the Big House, and it should be the biggest game of the year up to that point. Both teams are expected to be in the top 10 in the nation and are looking for more this year. In Week 7, it's the Red River rivalry. Oklahoma and Texas will face off in this classic matchup. This will be a very competitive game of 2 former Big 12 teams going to the SEC. And then 1 week later, they have to prepare for the Bulldogs to come into town in what will be the Longhorns' first time against an SEC Blue Blood. The Bulldogs are a very strong team, as we've already covered, and this matchup should be a great one. The Longhorns have a very promising offensive line, which is led by Kelvin Banks Jr. He only allowed 1 sack last year in 550 chances. He should be a force on this Texas O-line. The Longhorns are led by quarterback Quinn Ewers, who was one of the best quarterbacks in the nation last year. An interesting storyline is brewing, though, with the Ewers versus Archie Manning, who's a crazy hyped prospect, but he has sat behind Ewers for the past couple of years. Finally is defensive end Trey Moore, who had 30 tackles with 14 sacks last year. Moore is a great athlete and will bring a great presence to this Longhorns defense. Last year, the Longhorns won the Big 12, but lost in the college football semifinal to Washington University. This year, they will look to advance in a new college playoff format. Thank you for watching this episode of Section 101. We had a blast with this episode, and there will be a part 2 next week of the 5 to 10 teams in college football. College football is seeing many changes this year, but we aren't going anywhere. Keep an eye out for our uploads and check out our Instagram for channel updates. If you enjoyed, leave a like, and if not, we would love to hear your comments. We'll see you next time.